friends, the family and friends of GPA South Africa or Global Prophetic Alliance South Africa, CWOW Global, Agero School of Prophets, everybody, good morning, and welcome to this beautiful Thursday morning. And it is our Christmas day, what we call our Christmas day, whether you celebrate Christmas or whether you don't celebrate Christmas. That's quite okay with me. I don't have an issue either way. And we all know, right? We all know that Jesus wasn't born today. He wasn't born on the 25th of December because of various reasons and things. Good morning, my gorgeous Helette friend. Welcome this morning. So anyway, I just thought that I would bring a short Christmas message this morning. Beautiful Brigitte, welcome. Special Sam, good morning. Good morning. Oh, thank you. Yes, this is my new office space. Beautiful Bertha, welcome. Good grief, I actually wasn't expecting to see so many of you on the live because I know that so many of you have got small children and either the presents are already open and done, or I don't know what you're going to do for the rest of the day. But good morning, Milani and Yop. Welcome. Merry Christmas. Anthea, my lovely, special Sylvia, welcome. Yes, so this is my new office space, my new recording space, and it is courtesy of our landlady who wonderful Wendy, good morning, Merry Christmas, who decided to do some last minute renovations, which have caused us a fair amount of stress. But it's all good because this is now my new office space, and doesn't it look just absolutely amazing? And can I just give a shout out to Pep Home? This isn't an advert or anything, but honestly, Pep Home are just the most amazing space for like ornaments and things like that. But so, okay, there we go. Thank you. Yes, I know. So thank you. Yes, so the children have already opened. Okay, their presents, right. All right, my children haven't because they are adults and they aren't even awake yet. A joyful Jolene, welcome, my lovely. So this is my new office space, and I suppose it is very significant that on Christmas Day you get to see my brand new space. I don't want to show you the rest of the house, which is still requires some deep level cleaning and dusting before my family descend here on to celebrate Christmas with us. So think of me, because the next 4 hours are going to be full. Oh, there we go. Wendy's daughter-in-law is a Pepperm queen. Come on, absolutely. More, lovely Louise. It must be almost over for you in New Zealand. Christmas must be nearly done already, Shirley. You're heading into your night, aren't you? Christmas night now. So you're way ahead of all of us. But anyway, so I'm going to keep this message very short because it is Christmas morning and everybody has family, and I still have a whole load of cleaning and cooking and present wrapping to do. I haven't had a chance to wrap the presents yet either. So the next few hours, pray for me, are going to be very hectic. But good morning, Conrad. Lovely to see you on the live. And thank you, yes, to all of you who are wishing us for Christmas. Sorry, I still need to get some of my things sorted out here in terms of maybe a little table or something. But otherwise, we are all good. So, Merry Christmas, my joyful Jen friend. Lovely to see you. So I wanted to actually just do a Christmas message about how wrong we have Christmas. And I know it's not a typical Christmas message, okay, but I think it's a very necessary one, because our Christmas and our understanding of the Christmas story has very much been reinforced by, years and years of Sunday school lessons. If you grew up in the church the way I did, years and years of Sunday school lessons and nativity scenes and all sorts of things. And so actually the way that we often imagine the Christmas story or the birth of Jesus as having taken place is actually not really correct in terms of not new, but archaeological studies of the way people lived in those days, and just actually an understanding of the gospel according to Middle Eastern people. Wonderful, Volna. Merry Christmas, my lovely. According to Middle Eastern people and people who actually still live in similar communities and hold similar beliefs and all of that to the way they did back in ancient biblical times. So I want to just give us a little bit of a refresh of the Christmas story and a little bit of an explanation as to why even some of the songs that we sing, about Christmas and you know I'm thinking of sort of Away in a Manger, like songs like that don't actually really represent the way Jesus's birth would have been experienced. So there are just a few things that I want to clarify this morning. And firstly, and obviously most importantly, that we all know that Jesus wasn't born today. Okay, just like, can we just, in case any of you watching this on the live or later on the replay, think that Jesus might have been born today, he wasn't born today. Okay, today it is winter in Israel. It is cold. It sometimes even snows in some parts of Israel over this time of the year. It's freezing cold. And so the shepherds wouldn't have been out in the fields with their flocks in the freezing cold at night. They would have been, in some way, or they would, corralled somewhere, or in barns somewhere. They wouldn't be out there with their sheep. So that's just one point of how we know that Jesus wasn't born, because it might be the middle of summer for us in South Africa, but actually it's not the middle of summer in Israel. And also, we need to understand and recognize how we have culturally misappropriated, is that the right word? I think culturally misappropriated the story of the birth of Jesus and looked at it through Western eyes instead of looking at it through Middle Eastern eyes. And Middle Eastern people have always done things and do things very, very differently to the way we do them here. So we're in Luke chapter 2. And we're just going to read through Luke chapter 2, the story of the birth of Jesus, and just correct some long-held incorrect ideas. Okay, so Luke chapter 2 verse 1, in those days it occurred that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole Roman Empire should be registered. This was the first enrollment, and it was made when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all the people were going to be registered, each to his own city or town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the town of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David. So firstly, can we just take a moment to just pay a bit of attention to Joseph. So Joseph was of the house and family of David. He was a direct descendant of David. You know how in the genealogies in the Bible, they say son of this, son of, son of, son of. Joseph could go, son of, son of, son of, and get back to David. So he was a direct descendant of David, born of the lineage of David, which means in a town like Bethlehem, which was known as the town of David, even though Jerusalem was the city of David, Bethlehem was known as the town of David. In a town like Bethlehem, where he was known to be of the lineage of David, he would have been treated like royalty. So there wouldn't have been people turning him away at the door, despite the fact that he married Mary and the scandal around her pregnancy. The people would not have been turning them away, because Joseph was a direct descendant of David, from the house of David, and he could prove that lineage, and everybody would have known and understood that lineage. So this is the first thing that we have. We have this idea that Mary and Joseph, these kind of outcasts of civilization, had to travel to Bethlehem, that Joseph was this kind of useless husband who couldn't arrange accommodation for his pregnant wife who was about to give birth, and all of these sorts of things. And actually that is not true. That is an incorrect perception of Joseph. That poor guy has lasted for years. And then it says, verse 5, Luke 2 verse 5, to be enrolled with Mary, his espoused married wife, who was about to become a mother, and while they were there, the time came for her delivery. Now, for some reason, we have this idea that they just made it to Bethlehem in time for Mary to give birth. And actually, that's not what it says in the scripture, not what it says in the gospel. It simply says that while they were there, the time came for her to deliver the baby. It doesn't say how long they were there for or anything. So we have this incorrect idea that they kind of had to rush to find a place because Mary was, sitting on the donkey having contractions. That actually isn't the way that it took place at all. And while they were there, it came time for Mary to have the baby, but it wasn't a kind of an overnight, zero to hero, speed as fast as you can in case she doesn't make it in time. It actually was a much more relaxed, calm entry. And then it's verse 7, it says she gave birth, and this is the verse that causes the issues, okay? So verse 7, Luke chapter 2 verse 7 says this, and she gave birth to her son, her firstborn, and she wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no room or place for them in the inn. Now, people who live in the Middle East, who've lived there all their lives, or were born there, or grew up there, or have taught and lectured and spoken there for years on end, have an understanding of the Middle Eastern ways, and also an understanding of the language that was used. Now, the word, and I'm not going to go into all the ancient Hebrew because that will be, I'm not going to go into the ancient Hebrew or the ancient Greek because it all gets very complicated. But effectively, the word that we have translated into English as in is not actually the word used for in other parts of the Bible. The word that we have translated as in is actually should be translated as space. There was no space for them. There was no space for them. Not at the inn, there just was no space for them. Now, people who grew up in the Middle East and know Middle Eastern culture and customs, this is how they explain it. So they say this, that in those days, and archaeologists have proved this, okay, the houses that people lived in were generally very simple two-roomed houses. Either a room with a little room on top, which they then often called the prophet's room, which is where, we read the stories in the Old Testament of the prophets who went and stayed with people. They would have stayed in the prophet's room. Or there would be two rooms next to each other, because hospitality was a big deal and is still a big deal in the Middle East. Hospitality is, when we look at the different covenants in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there is the Salt Covenant, which is the covenant of hospitality. It means that, you come, you are welcome. And that was why the way Lot treated the angels, even in the midst of, Sodom, the hospitality was very much an ancient Middle Eastern way, very much part of the way that they were. You look at parables like the Good Samaritan, hospitality was a big deal. So for example, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, the word there translated for in is different to the word used in this particular instance in the story of the birth of Jesus. So Joseph and Mary, particularly because Joseph was born of the line of David, they would have been welcomed in Bethlehem. And so, I think I lost my thread there for a moment. So every person would have had two rooms, and one room was always the guest room, because hospitality was of paramount importance, okay? So one room was always the guest room. The guest room was always there and always available for guests. But because this was, everybody had to go up and do this whole census, everyone had family. People had come up in their droves to be a part of this whole census, and so everyone's guest rooms were full. So what Middle Eastern scholars say would have happened is that Joseph and Mary would have come to the home of whomever it was, and the guest room was full. So the person would have said, there is no space in the guest room for you. But because of the way they were so hospitable, they would have invited them then into their family room. So the family room, Joseph and Mary would have come into the room where all the family lived, because the guest room already had guests in it. Okay. Now, another very interesting thing is this, that in ancient Middle Eastern times, everybody had a sheep, a cow. That was how they did things in those days. So they had a sheep, a cow, they had maybe a donkey, whatever. And at night, those animals would be brought into the family room. So the sheep, the donkey, the cow, whatever you had as your animals would be brought into the family room, firstly to provide warmth, because they added warmth to the room, and secondly to keep them safe so nobody could steal them. So Joseph and Mary would have been invited into this family room, and when evening fell, the animals would have been brought into the room. Okay, so because of this, because the animals were brought into the room in the evenings, the mangers were actually not these little wooden things that we see in nativity scenes with Jesus lying in it. It would have been a cement structure. So the family rooms were built with these like cement structures dug out of the ground for the manger, so that if the cow got hungry during the night, she could eat. Okay, and then they were built on like a slight slope, so that in the morning, when the animals were put outside for the day, the floors could be cleaned and everything could be swept and watered down the slight gradient, so that it could run out the door. So the manger would have been a kind of a dug out, a permanent fixture, not something that sort of moved around, a permanent fixture in the room with straw in it, etc., for the cows. And Jesus would have been wrapped in swaddling clothes, not because Mary didn't have, a little outfit from Edgar's for him, but because that was how they did it in ancient Middle East. When the babies were born, they were swaddled, they wrapped them in swaddling clothes. And you can see how that has come back into, reels of new moms and that whole idea of swaddling the baby, wrapping them tightly, has made a reappearance. It's become popular again, but that was how the babies were swaddled in those days when they were born. So it's not that they were too poor for clothes for him. They wouldn't have been wealthy, but they would have had swaddling clothes. Also, Mary wouldn't have been alone. So in ancient times, and still true in rural communities, women do not give birth alone. Women did not give birth alone. Joseph and the men would have had to, go to the other side of the room or into the guest room with the guests, or I'm not quite sure where the men would have gone. But the women would have surrounded the women in the house. There would have been a midwife. They would have surrounded Mary, no matter the circumstances of the conception of Jesus. That wouldn't have bothered them, according to Middle Eastern scholars. That wouldn't have bothered them in the moment. The questions around the conception of Jesus wouldn't have bothered them. Here was a young girl, and she would have been very young, probably mid-teens, and she is early to mid-teens, and she is about to give birth, and the women would have come around her. There would have been a midwife present, who was there. There would have been the women in the house, the women who were guests. They all would have come around her and supported her. And exactly, Sylvia, this practice is still in use in the villages in the Middle East. They would have come around her, they would have supported her, and they would have helped her with the birth of Jesus. So it's not like, we kind of picture Mary in a stall all on her own, and Joseph kind of having to bite through the umbilical cord with his teeth or something like that. I don't think we think I don't think we pay too much attention to the actual physical birth of Jesus, but the point is this, that Jesus was born into a warm, comfortable place filled with people and people supporting his mom, and he would have been held and swaddled and cuddled and laid in the manger. He wasn't born into some stark cold place and sort of where there was no one. He would have been born in typical Middle Eastern style, in surrounded by people, by friends, by family, by animals. There would definitely have been animals there. That part of the nativity scene is very much correct. And then what happens here is that verse 8, the shepherds are out under the open skies in the field, watching over their flocks by night. And an angel comes to them, and the angel says to them, that this is, do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of a great joy, which will come to all the people. For to you is born this day in the town of David a Savior, who is Christ the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign for you by which you will recognize him. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And then a whole host of angels appear. Now the shepherds, for those of you who don't know, being a shepherd in ancient Middle Eastern times was not a great job. Shepherds were despised. Traditionally, in the same way as women couldn't give testimony in court because women were believed to always be liars. The same way shepherds also weren't allowed, their testimony wasn't accepted in court because they were known to be liars and thieves, whether that was correct or not, but that is the perception of a shepherd. Shepherds weren't welcome in, very sort of posh locations. They weren't included in things. They weren't anything. And the first people the angels appear to are the shepherds, because Jesus is nothing if not inclusive. He came for everyone. And so the first people who came to see the baby were the shepherds. And the fact that they knew that he was lying in a manger and that Joseph and Mary had to crowd into the family room of somebody's home because there was no guest room for them would have made them feel more comfortable with actually being able to be accepted there and to visit Jesus, because they didn't feel like they would be told to leave or whatever, because he was born into humble circumstances, not lonely circumstances, but humble circumstances. So the shepherds, the excluded, the poor, the poorest, the first people who are told that here is this baby that has been born, come and see him. And they go off and they see Jesus. And then, and then if you read through Luke, you will see, that the shepherds return in 8 days. Jesus is circumcised. Then they take him up to Jerusalem to be dedicated and for Mary's purification. And then they see Simeon and Anna, and we're not going to go into that right now. But we do know from the other Gospels that the wise men, or the Magi, visited Jesus. Okay, so now, if you've been following me for any length of time, you should know the answer to this question. How many wise men came to see Jesus? How many wise men came to see Jesus? How many Magi visited Jesus? If you've been following me for any length of time, you should know the answer. It's okay if you get the answer wrong. It's okay. Everyone's very quiet in the comments now. You're very quiet in the comments now. More than 3. Yes, okay. So thank you. Right, so you have been following. My special Sylvia and my beautiful Bertha have been following me for years, so they know this answer. There were not 3 wise men. The Bible, Radiant Raj, the answer is not 3. Thank you. The Bible doesn't tell us actually how many wise men there were. Somewhere along the line, I suppose, for nativity scenes and Christmas plays. Sorry, I've got something in my eye. And I can't seem to get rid of it. For nativity scenes and Christmas plays, I suppose you can't have a whole wealth of wise men. but there were not there were three gifts spoken about, or there were gifts of myrrh, gifts of gold, gifts of frankincense. We don't know, was it just one pot of myrrh or a whole lot of myrrh? Was it one bit of gold or a whole lot of gold? We don't know how much myrrh, how much gold, how much frankincense. We don't know if there were 10 men carrying gold and 10 men carrying frankincense and 10 men carrying myrrh, or if there were 3 men carrying each, or we don't know. We just know there were wise men, plural, so there was more than one, but there wasn't three. Nowhere in the Bible does it say there were 3 wise men. Okay, so that's that. And then also the wise men were not at the birth of Jesus. The wise men followed the star from the east, which means that they probably came from what was then called Arabia. So they were more than likely Arabs. They would have been Gentiles. They followed the star from the east. They would have gotten to Jesus probably when he was around 2, which is also why when Herod issued his terrible instruction to kill all the male babies 2 and under, if Jesus had been a newborn, Herod would have just said to his men, kill the newborns. But Jesus wasn't newborn. Jesus was somewhere around 2 years old. He was a toddler when the wise men came to visit him. So it didn't all happen around the birth. The wise men only came later when Jesus was approaching toddlerhood, where he would have been around 2, maybe just under 2, somewhere around there. So he wouldn't have, he wouldn't have seen, the wise men weren't at the birth. Otherwise, Herod would have just wiped out the newborns. But he wiped out all the male children from 2 and under. I mean, if you think, genocide, that was genocide. He killed, murdered male babies 2 and under, and in an absolutely horrific, bloodthirsty attack. He was a very, very odd man, Herod. He was very strange, and he murdered people left, right, and center. He killed his own sons. He killed his 2 favorite sons. They were his favorite sons, and he killed them because he was always so worried about someone trying to take his throne from him that murder was no new thing to Herod. He was, he murdered his own family, so killing a whole generation of, exactly, Sylvia, genocide is not a new thing. We think that everything only happens now, in our lifetimes, or in our parents' lifetimes, our grandparents' lifetimes. No, genocide is not a new thing. Genocide has been around for centuries and centuries and eons and eons. So, yeah, genocide isn't new. So Jesus would have been around 2, probably, when the wise men came to him, because that was why. And then Joseph took them to Egypt. And Egypt, which is Africa, right, welcomed them with open arms, and they were safe there. So God has a soft spot for Africa. He has a soft spot for Egypt. He really does. But the beauty of the story of the wise men is they were Gentiles. They were not Jews. So they came, they saw the star. They weren't even believers in God. They were astrologers. They followed the constellations. They watched the signs in the sky, and they saw the star and knew that the star meant that this something miraculous had happened. And so they traveled a great distance to come to see this baby that was born under that star, and to give him gifts that many scholars and theologians say would have kept Jesus and his family, would have kept them financially, if you want to think about it financially, for a long time. That the gold and the myrrh and the frankincense was worth so much that they would have been able to live comfortably. Jesus and his family, they would have been able to live comfortably for, some scholars say, for the rest of their lives. So it's not that Jesus was poor and that was why he went out, and he said, I have no place to lay my head. It's not that he was poor. It was because he went out as a servant. So when Jesus went out, he went out with nothing, so that he needed people to help him, and then he could help them. So he wasn't, walking in like this. And I think this is what we just don't understand, particularly when it comes to evangelism. He wasn't walking in like, here I am, and I'm just going to save you all and just make your lives all fine again. He came as a humble servant. He came as a suffering servant. He came as someone where I have nothing. I need a place to stay. I need food. I need water from the well. We need people to support us financially, because people feel empowered when they can help you, and then they're more able to receive from you, which again is also why he told his 70 to go out without anything. Don't take a purse, don't take shoes, don't take extra shoes, don't take this, don't take that, because he was saying to them, you go, and if you go where people need to help you, then they don't feel so bad about receiving from you, because they've helped you. So it's an exchange, rather than me coming in and going, I'm just going to make your lives great, and so let me just fix all your problems. And meanwhile, the people don't generally respond very well to that, I think. Or if they do respond to it, they respond from the wrong agenda or motivation, which I think we can see quite clearly happens in Africa. But so it's not that Jesus was poor, it's that he chose to go out with nothing, so that he could relate to people, so people could relate to him, and so that he could be dependent on people, and then they would understand that they could be dependent on him, because ancient Middle Eastern times, and even still today, in the rural Middle East, it's very much like that. It's very much community based. If you look at the Jewish people, if you look at the Muslim people, they're very community based, very community, very much about family and everything. It's only in the Western influence and the Western world, the white, if I could say that, white, Western influenced Western world, where we've all been taught that we just need to be very individualistic and not need to rely on anyone and not need to look after anyone and not need to, that's not typical of communities in the Middle East even today. So that was what Jesus was born into. He was born into community. He was born into a space that was warm and cozy, and where people were living their lives the way they lived their lives in the ancient Middle Eastern times. So I don't have small children anymore, okay, so my children are adults, so they won't even notice these things. But I was putting the Christmas tree up last night, because the contractors, what is today, Thursday, the contractors only left on Tuesday. So I started everything yesterday. So putting the Christmas tree up, that's why I still have to wrap presents and finish cooking. And so I'm going to love and leave you very shortly. But, and I've got a nativity scene. And I looked at the nativity scene, and I just thought, no, I can't actually do this. I can't put this out, because it's such an incorrect representation of Jesus's birth. I'm not saying you need to chuck away your nativity scenes, okay? I'm saying that was and as I said, I have big children. They won't even notice that. So, but it's just, and so just very quickly before I go, how did all of these misconceptions come about? So, according to scholars, about 200 years after Jesus was born, about 200 years after Jesus was born, somebody wrote like a novel, a story. It's anonymous. Nobody knows who actually wrote it. And in those days, people apparently wrote books anonymously, and it was a very, so somebody wrote a story around the birth of Jesus. That the early church fathers and people like that just completely were like, no, this is completely wrong. But somehow or other, as often happens if you read the Left Behind books and you watch the Left Behind movies, often what happens is somehow people read the story and the story becomes more real to them than actually fact. That's where we get conspiracy theories from, where the story that is told by someone who is very charismatic or very, good at telling stories, is so influential that it's taken as fact. And this novel, even though the early church fathers and scholars and theologians spoke out against it, apparently this novel started becoming accepted by people as what happened at the birth of Jesus. And it has a whole lot of other details in it that we, thank the Lord, haven't adopted, but still, it's this, so this has all kind of just been a big swirly mess for 2,000 years now. And things have crept in, and because we are not very good at looking at the actual text and being like, what does it say in the actual text, because we're not very good at that, we have just accepted the things that we've been told and taught about the Christmas story, and not true. So after all of that, now that I've given you the reality of the Christmas story, and so hopefully you feel better about it, actually, better about the way Jesus made his entry into the world, and that it was a community affair and not just Mary trying on her own. But hopefully you feel better about it. Anyway, I'm going to love and leave you now and go and do the million things I need to do. So I love you all. Bless you all. I hope you have a fabulous day today, whether you celebrate Christmas or not. I hope you have a fabulous day, and I will see you all on Monday morning at 8 a.m. on Facebook Live. Mwah. Bless you. Have a wonderful day.